Hi, and welcome to this new podcast that we're launching that sort of delves into the world of the fascinating world of organisation development. So, in these next few podcasts, what we're going to do is actually talking to experienced OD practitioners out in the field and really exploring what do they do, how do they do it, and what kind of challenges are they tackling out in the workplace. So, in this series of podcasts, what we want to do is to sort of lift all the mystery out of organisation development and make it really accessible. So, if you're someone who is maybe in HR and you're considering moving into OD, whether you're actually just starting on your OD journey, or if you're just interested to learn more about OD and how you can actually build it into your practice as a leader or an HR practitioner, then this should be a really interesting session. Now, I'm absolutely delighted that the first guest that we've got in this series is the brilliant Liz Childs. So Liz Childs is someone we've invited to a previous session from CIPD, and she was brilliant, sort of sharing her experiences as an OD consultant at the House of Commons. And prior to that, she's had a really long, distinguished career in change as well. So she's very generally offered to give us 25 minutes of her time to sort of share her experiences, how she got into OD as well, and also just to share a little bit about her background, and all in the service of supporting other people move into OD as well. So hi, Liz, and thank you so much for your time. We're really appreciative of it.
Hi, Garin. Thank you, and it's great to be here. And yeah, I really like you saying. That's a really nice introduction that you've made there, and I just hope that if anyone, I'm not setting myself up as the expert, but if anyone can learn from the mistakes and challenges I've had along the way, I think that would be great, and I'd really want to be a part of that and help people who are thinking about their careers and so on. So thank you.
That's a really good point. One of the big things about OD is the big word is it depends, doesn't it, on what we do, on the context and that as well. And that's what's really good. So it's always like sort of saying, like, there's no such thing as an expert. There's always like a 5-step process to follow. It's about, what do you do in these different circumstances as well. Brilliant. So for those of you just tuning in and maybe haven't met you before, can you just tell us a little about you and your role? And what does your OD role involve actually at the House of Commons and places you've done it before as well?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm an internal OD practitioner, or they call it org design and development consultant, but it gets called different things, doesn't it? At the House of Commons, and I've been there for about 5 years now. And what you're saying about context, I think, is really important, because it's an organisation, in contrast to other places where I've worked, it's an organisation where maybe OD isn't so well established, which is fine. That's just where the organisation is and where it is. So prior to that, I did quite a bit in change and HR and OD in the NHS and in education. And I started out in HR, so I made that switch over quite a few years ago over time. Currently, it's probably worth saying a bit about the context first, about the House of Commons, because it's such a fascinating place to work. And I think you don't see from the stuff you see on the outside, you see the stuff in the news and about the MPs and what happens in the chamber and all of that kind of thing. And there's so much stuff going on behind the scenes to keep the place running. So you've got the MPs and they employ staff, and that's kind of a separate thing to what I do. So my role is in supporting what we call the House Service. So that's about 3,000 employees who are there to keep the organisation running. And it's so diverse because you've got people who are specialists in select committee procedure, the political processes and so on, who are helping that side of things happen. It's a World Heritage Site, so it's a visitor attraction. You've got visitor services, you've got notable art collections, furniture, so we've got curators and specialist cleaners, and we've got people responsible for locks and keys and clocks and all these kind of things, as well as security, massive security operation. There's a big restoration and renewal program going on. So there's architects, project managers, health and safety experts, all of those kinds of things, as well as all the usual corporate functions you get in an organisation like HR, finance, comms, and so on and so on. And I haven't mentioned them all. So I don't think I've ever worked anywhere that's such a mix, so diverse. And it's also really busy. And so people need to be quite reactive and respond in the moment. So you kind of think of these places maybe as a bit old and slow and so on, but actually there's such a lot going on and it can turn quite quickly, and people just have to make things happen. People make things happen really quickly. So my role, I'm in the corporate centre, and I think that there's the tension that my colleagues and I have quite often, and it's something we discuss quite a lot, is what needs to be consistent and corporate and come from the centre, and what needs to be bespoke to help such a diverse range of people with different needs, different working practices, different working patterns, and so on. So over the time that I've been there, I've worked on a range of corporate projects and local projects, I call them. And it's quite often bringing that, because I said like OD isn't so well established, it's quite often bringing that lens, so the OD values that humanistic systemic lens to work that's already in train, really. So the work would happen anyway, but you're bringing something else to it maybe that wouldn't have been there. So, things like corporate work, providing that on leadership development approach, or an approach to the L&D strategy or something like that. And then local work, working with local business leaders who are implementing change in their local areas, or want to bring people together more. So it's quite disjointed, and I don't mean again to say that in a negative way. It's just the way the organisation has evolved. So quite a lot of the challenge is, how do we get people connected and collaborating more so that there's less duplication of effort and resources are used effectively and so on. It's quite often working with people to help them figure out, well, how can we do that? Or even to realise that this is something that might be worth looking at. At the moment, I'm working on a quite significant change programme in one part of the business, and I've taken on an active role there in the engaging people through change. So I've got a role in the project on how people are engaged as they go through that change journey. And also, something we've done over the last couple of years is started to develop OD mindset and skills among people who are leading change in their own business areas. So we've partnered with Maven, who I think we both know, to develop a programme, and now we've run a first cohort of that programme, which seems to have gone down well, and we're now running action learning sets and continuing the development for people who went through that programme. So hopefully there'll be another one of those happening too. So
yeah, absolutely fascinating. You just described this incredibly interesting organisation with lots of people with different professional backgrounds, social backgrounds, working different shift patterns, all into this sort of highly pressurized pot that everyone has to try, and it has to work somehow, doesn't it? And I love some of the things you're saying there, which is a big part of OD, which is sort of managing tensions within an organisation. Do we run things centrally, or do we run things decentralized? And it's never either or. It's trying to find the right balance, and that balance will be shifting as well. Is that something that you notice? What kind of tensions are you managing in there?
Yeah. So I think that it is a balance, and it is shifting. And I feel things, certainly for the corporate functions, there's a drive now to a stronger centre. That seems to be the way it's going. We had a review last year that recommended that. But then you can't just make that happen. So it's like you're saying, it's how do you evolve that? Because there's really established things out there, and they're there for a reason. So I think a lot of what my colleagues and I are doing is building connection. I think that's so important. Just, and it can sound quite woolly, can't it? But getting people, even through that OD capability programme, part of the benefit of that has been bringing people together to share challenges and issues, that they were facing individually, and then they start to see, well, there's some common practices, or there's some common challenges, there's some things we can do together, there's different things we can adopt, so it happens more organically and it's a bit more fluid.
It's really interesting, because I guess one of the things about organisation, but by the nature of its name, it sees the whole organisation, doesn't it? And when people are working quickly, and and you said it's quite reactive as well, our worlds get a little smaller, don't they? So often it's the role of the organisation to say, well, actually, in the system, there's all these different bits, and
Yes.
it's our task to bring these things together. But sometimes it doesn't actually feel like a proper job, does it? Because it's just like, it's just connecting people.
Yeah. And sometimes it doesn't feel like a proper job. I think that's right. It's like you think in a way, when you are trying to quantify, well, how have you added value? And I find that quite hard sometimes to say, to talk about that was it. And quite often you won't be thanked for that because they're under some pressure, some external pressure from them to get this thing done and to get it delivered. And then you can be the person going, well, what about, hang on a minute, let's just look at this another way. One of my stock phrases, have you thought about this from this perspective? And it's how do you make that feel valuable to someone in the moment? It can be a real challenge, and you can quite often see people going, and this isn't just in the House of Commons, it's in other places I've worked too. Well, yeah, that's a really good point, thanks. And then we'll just carry on because that's just too difficult and too complicated.
And I guess a big part of OD, and we'll drill a little bit more into your role in a second, because we'll be really interested to hear that. A lot of OD is about prevention.
Yes.
And how do you measure prevention? And no one gives each other a high five saying, wow, we just prevented that from happening.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
It should just run really nicely without you, shouldn't it? Because you're intervening at the right place.
Yeah, I think that's it. These things happen anyway, so I've worked quite a bit in change. And I think, again, well, those changes would have been delivered anyway, but whether I'd been there or not, I can't profess to have made them happen. I think they have happened more smoothly and people have felt more involved and able to shape the future. And, these are all good things in my opinion. That I think that's where, I know we're going to come on to that in a bit, but that's where you need to be at home with yourself a bit, I think, when you work in OD.
Yeah, it's not about the ego, is it?
Yes,
it's about
exactly.
the system and about you enabling the system as well. Really good points. So for those of it, people, and again, there's no such thing as a typical day, but what does a typical day look like for you as an organisation development consultant?
Yeah, and I mean, you're right, that there is no such thing as a typical day. So I was thinking about, well, what are the kinds of things that I am doing? So, and like you just said earlier, I spend a lot of time talking to people. So I'm in conversations a lot, and it could be figuring out a way forward with somebody about a project or a piece of work that they're doing. It could be contracting for a specific intervention that I'm working with them on, taking on a piece of work for them, helping them describe what success looks like. I think that goes back to what we were just talking about, helping them, so using a lot. I've done a bit of over the last couple of years, I've focused quite a bit on coaching as well, sort of in addition to my OD role. And I think those skills have been really helpful to bring to the OD role as well, in really helping get below the surface with people and helping them define, well, what really matters in this work to you, and how will you define success, and who does it matter to, and how will they define it, and so on. I might be designing workshops, facilitating difficult conversations or quite easy conversations with people, but I find a lot that I'm creating spaces that they wouldn't have otherwise had. And in some ways, it doesn't really matter what it's labeled. So it might be, take forward the project plan, but actually what I see they're getting from it is a space to process stuff that they wouldn't necessarily create for themselves.
And that's really important, isn't it? So, like I said, even though you're an internal person within the organisation, you're still opening up an external space for people to take away from the front line, and to look at things differently and talk differently as well.
Yes, yeah. That and that's it. And then sometimes, they'll come out of it and go, oh, that was good, and it wasn't quite what they expected. And there's a bit, maybe you've provided a space for a bit of any anxiety or worry to be surfaced and got out, and then they feel that they can move on afterwards. It could be creating things. So in this work I'm doing at the moment, on engagement that I was talking about, well, I've been doing things like this. I've been getting people to record videos, creating slide decks or other things, to products in a way, or pulling people together, so I'm quite often thinking, well, who could I get involved in this, and who would benefit from being involved, and how would the system benefit if X or Y person was involved, and what would motivate them to be involved, and just trying to create that as well, that energy for and spaces for people to create things for themselves, just being a bit of a catalyst, I suppose, for some of those things to happen.
What a great word, catalyst. And it sounds like variety is important to you as well. What gives you enjoyment or joy or satisfaction in your role?
So there's so many things I enjoy about OD. I think that's why I've landed here. But I think the key thing is, because I see it as, I think I hold as a core value enabling people to grow. And I think that's the OD values too, this humanistic, the human potential and so on. So what I really enjoy is being in a setting. So it could be with an individual or a group, or it could be something I see, even, it might have been a conversation I had a year ago, and then I see something later and I think, well, that I've done something, I've been a catalyst maybe, or provided that thing that's enabled that person or that group to shift something for themselves. And also that's been done in service not just of themselves, but of making the organisation better, which ultimately then maybe the organisation is more effective, or it's become a better working experience for other people there. It's become a better place to be a part of. But I think OD is such a, so that's, I think that's the core of who I am. So I really enjoy doing that. And I really enjoy connecting people. Like we were just saying, seeing, well, what happens if these two people get together? Just think what could happen, just think what could happen if we put these people in a room together, and seeing the potential sort of grow out of that. But I love learning, finding out new ideas and so on. And OD is such a vast and rich field to explore. There's always something to find out about, or learn about, or dig into, and being able to do that and then bring it back and try and apply it to my work, I really enjoy that too. There's that sort of real mental stimulation to it as well, I think.
Wow, it sounds like it's like the task, like the personal growth, like the interactions with people. There's just so many sort of sources of satisfaction. A lot of people that sort of come into OD and find OD so often describe it as a bit of a calling when it happens. Is that it?
Yes.
Like, how was it for you how did you find out about OD? And
well, it was a bit random really, because I was in my background, as I said, was in HR, and I went to do an HR role in a new shared services organisation. So it's where they'd pulled some back office services together into one. And I arrived just as this had all been set up. So staff had come across, and they're all a bit, it's all a bit sort of, this is all a bit strange and bewildering, and there's less of us, and we've got the same work and so on. So the job of the team I was in was to make this work. With the help that there was it was a really good chief exec and team around as well. And the chief exec got OD. He was somebody who had previously worked with OD and understood it. And they were advertising this role for an OD and change manager. And my team were, saying it's really difficult to recruit to this role. And then someone said, well, aren't you going to go for it because it's what you're doing? And it was a bit like strange, because I'd never really heard, and at that time, it's going back a few years now, I guess. I think it's more out there now than it was then. I don't think it featured that strongly in the CIPD profession map and all that sort of stuff. So, so I had the opportunity to give it a go, just to give it a go and see, like, on a temporary basis. And then what happened was, during that time, I went to a conference. It was only one day. It was a conference where the late Mian Chung Judge was a speaker.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh my goodness, because it felt like for the first time all this stuff was making sense about why, she was talking about organizations and the things we do, and she was saying, well, why would you do that? Why would you put people through that? And why do we make these things happen? And it just sort of all landed for me at that point, really. But then, that was
wow,
that was it.
all the stars aligned for you.
Yeah.
And we talked about it is difficult to actually draw a direct correlation between OD's efforts and outcomes, but obviously you have accountabilities to people in your organisation. So how do you measure success in your role, or how do others look to actually assess how well you're doing?
Yeah. It's an interesting one, isn't it? And I think the answer is when I'm starting to work with people on a piece of work, I explore with them what success looks like for them. What is it you're really trying to achieve? How will you know it's been done well? All that contracting type stuff that we talk about. And then, checking with them along the way. Well, how are we doing? Designing some measures, some evaluation measures around that, which could be quite hard measures, around it. This is, customer service things will improve, or team satisfaction will improve, or engagement scores will improve, or it could be a bit more nebulous. Well, I'll feel satisfied. And I think, certainly in this context that I'm in, that's probably mainly what it's about. The project that I'm working on at the moment, there are some deliverables in that, but again, they've come about through conversations at the start. Well, what do I need to deliver? Rather than, so I can look at things and think, well, yeah, I can see the connection between what I've done. I can see that the fact that these two groups of people are now working together, that these things are happening, and that's good. But it would be a bit of a leap for me to make that case up there at the top. So I think it's about working with the people that you're contracting with to define success, and then try and show how you're helping them achieve it.
And it's so important, isn't it? Because otherwise, if you don't do things like that, you get scope creep.
Yes.
People don't know what they want until they see it, or they just can't quite articulate their needs, can they?
Yes.
So it's like sort of really honing in on that clarity, so you can assess what done or good looks like as well. Really interesting. And again, for people that are watching this and really keen to get into OD, or people at the beginning of the career, what's the biggest lessons that you've learned in your role so far? I'm sure you've had lots, so you maybe can or can't share on the call. But what's the biggest lessons that you've learned in your role so far?
And I think there's probably a few, and I think the House of Commons has been such a massive learning place for me, because there's all these maxims, isn't there, that we have in OD, like start where the client is, know yourself would be one. Start where the client is. I think there's another one as well I was thinking of. And you kind of know them rationally, but are you really living them? And I think, I'm not saying I was never living them before, but it's such a complex and busy place. And I'm saying this in a really positive way. It's taught me how small I am in a way. Do you know what I mean? But and that's in a really, it's like you said earlier, it's helped me put my ego to one side and really focus on being there in service of the system. So having done a lot of work, a lot more work than I'd done before over the past 2 or 3 years on my own personal development, really digging deep, understanding my values and understanding what triggers me and why I might react certain ways and how that might play out in my work. All that kind of stuff I think is so important, and it's really worth investing in. I think if you want to do OD and feel okay with it all, and be able to work through it all, and starting where the client is, it's such a, there's some real, you think that organization, it's been there for hundreds of years, and some of the sort of ceremonial aspects are their traditions that have been there for hundreds of years, and that doesn't mean all the people there are really stuck in their ways or anything like that. It's a really dynamic and an innovative place, but at the same time you're working with that as a backdrop. So that's sort of just respecting where really respecting where people are, and there's really good reasons that they're there, and going to their place rather than coming at it from, well, there's all these things I know that you ought to be thinking about, and all of that. And I'm not saying I never did that before, but I think they're really big learnings that I've taken from working there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it is really important, isn't it? Because I think, you know, you're sort of transitioning you to be the best OD practitioner, because there's a lot of emotions in the workplace. There's
yeah,
stress. People project a lot of things onto you when they're under
yes,
pressure. You know, they'll try and bring you in as the savior to fix all sorts of
yes,
different things. So it is really important to have that level of self-awareness and and
yes,
do the work. And it can be quite uncomfortable as you start to
mm,
really understand how you are and what you bring
yes.
and your past experiences. And you know, it's a challenging step to take, but it's one that's worth making, isn't it, if you want to make the biggest impact?
Absolutely worth making it, and I didn't know what I was getting myself into really when I started this. So I went off on um, an introduction weekend at the Institute for Psychosynthesis. So some people will have heard of that. And to me, that was like, whoa, what's all that about, And I really didn't know. And I spent this weekend, it was like 3 or 4 days of group therapy, having never encountered anything really like that before. I'd been coached before, but it hadn't gone that deep. And and I came out of it then thinking, well, I've got all this stuff now that I need to process and work through. But it's been so valuable, really, really valuable. Not just in my career, of course, but in my whole life.
Yeah, how you live your
And so
life, isn't it?
yeah,
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 and
yeah,
it is true. And I think sometimes, because OD is quite an aspirational career, you know, it's an
mm,
exciting job, but it is taking the time to do, because it can, like I sort of said, I think I was going through a similar process. Someone just looked at me and said, "You look really discombobulated," because I
yeah,
was going through the process, because you do get all the different parts of you taken
yeah,
away from you, don't you? And
yeah,
it is really looking into the mirror. So
yes.
interesting. So, what advice would you give to someone who is considering a career as an OD consultant? Like,
Mm,
what kind of bits of advice or wisdom or know-how could you pass on to them and say, look, this would
yeah,
make it easier?
yeah. So I think there's there's a few things really, and I think there's lots of there are qualifications obviously out there that are available, and I think that's if you have the resources to do that, I think that was a great thing to do and to invest in, and you'll get, because it will build your confidence and you'll get some practice and tools, but also your network. And I think that's what's so important in OD. So what I found really useful over the years is I know somebody who knows something about this or who does some work in this field, and I can facilitate people joining up and bringing them in. But also I've learned so much from the people I've collaborated with. So thinking again, how could you get involved in a piece of work that's happening and just offer some help and skills in something you do? Because OD is so broad, it needs project management as well to make it happen. It needs all these, the whole plethora of things. So you've probably already got something that will add value to a piece of OD work that's going on. So if you can see something there that's available, I think the OD community is pretty generous and pretty collaborative. So would generally be open to having people involved. So reach out, I'd say, chat to people, talk to people. And that bit about knowing yourself, it's an investment really worth taking. So it's, so you can do qualifications, you'll get all the tools and models and things like that. And I think when I was struggling in the past, I thought, well, it's because I don't know. I need to read another book. I've got all these books. I need to read another book, or I need to go on another course, or so on. But actually focusing in on how you're being and having a few things that you can put your hand to, and knowing where to get the other stuff from is probably more useful, I think, than just getting more and more content. It would be my take. And that was the thing I forgot to say before. The other OD maxim that we, knowing, but are you living it, is the one about consulting. The work gets done through relationships. It's not through knowing all this stuff that you're going to do good work. It's actually through knowing yourself as well, and being able to build and nurture effective relationships. That's the other thing the House of Commons has taught me that I forgot to say
Fantastic.
just before. So so the more you focus on how you invest in building and nurturing relationships as well is going to help you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Liz. like for those of you that tune into this, there's some really hard-won lessons being shared in here, so real wisdom as well. So if anyone's interested in this, are you happy for them to contact you via LinkedIn or just
Yeah,
drop you a
please
question if
do.
they've got any?
Yeah, please do. Yeah, and it'd be nice, and again, I think if you're considering a career in OD, wow, come on, there's so much interesting stuff to do, and if you're that way inclined, it would be really rewarding, I'm sure.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Liz. I really appreciate all
Mm.
your time. I know you're extremely busy and you're in the middle of busy change programs as well. So thank you for making the time. We'll be putting a new episode out really soon with another OD practitioner. I hope you found it useful. If you've got any comments, then please put them in the comments below. We'll be putting regular videos out like this. So if you just hit the subscribe button and ding the bell, you're notified when the next episode's out. But thanks again, Liz, for your time. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you.